Hello there, welcome to Bryan Lomax Movie Talk. It's been a while since I've dipped my toe into Hammer, the world of Hammer. A while back on my channel I did a series of videos called Hammer Time in which I looked at some Hammer movies. Again, like I say, first time that I've delved into them for quite a while. But I wanted to kind of complete, although I'm not quite there to be honest, I wanted to complete my look at the Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing vampire movies, Dracula movies. Like I said, there's still a couple that I have yet to take a look at, but these two in particular, Dracula AD 1972 and The Satanic Rites of Dracula, are the two that I wanted to get to. So I will be reviewing Satanic Rites of Dracula at some point very soon. For the sake of this video, I'm going to be taking a look at Dracula AD 1972. This film it comes at the arse end of Hammer's kind of film production in the early 70s. They were struggling really at this point to gain financing. A lot of the American kind of financiers started to pull out. They just didn't really see that the market was there anymore. Anthony Hines, who'd been a producer with Hammer, who produced a lot of their kind of successful horror movies, particularly their Dracula stuff, really wasn't into the angle they wanted to take with this. So James Carreras, however, who was the head of Hammer at the time, had other ideas. He wanted to bring Dracula into the modern day, and yeah, as a result, Hines was out and didn't really return, to be honest. With those kind of production qualms and kind of difficulties behind the scenes and the lack of funding, we get eventually this film, and I feel like those problems show. If I'm being perfectly honest, this is definitely not one of the best of the Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing kind of outings. Now, this is actually the first time since the original 1958 Dracula that Cushing and Lee are in one of these films together. It's a bit weird because it always felt to me like these two shared the screen a lot more. So coming back to these movies since having not seen them since I was a child, it did surprise me that actually, of all of them, they were only actually in 3 together. Yeah, I think there's like 7 or 8 altogether within this series. I know Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires is questionable as to whether you want to include it within this series of films, but yeah, it is what it is. But like I say, given the reputation of these two actors and just how associated they are with these roles, I would have expected them to have had a few more meetups than what they had. But Dracula AD 1972, I can't get it right. That title, it's just one of those titles that does not roll off the tongue. But anyway, it takes place in modern day after a brief kind of introduction back in the past, 100 years ago, 1872, in which Dracula and Van Helsing have their final confrontation, and both end up dying as a result of it. The battle is over, it's done, and then 100 years later, Dracula is resurrected by a teenage devil-worshipping miscreant who is part of a Dracula cult, who's been waiting to kind of resurrect their man for some time, and yeah, it's a bit naff, I'll be perfectly honest. So this character Alucard, which obviously is Dracula spelled backwards, he's this kind of poncy teenager who tricks his friends into having like a midnight seance where they're gonna do a bit of connecting with spirits and all that kind of stuff. They think it's a bit of a laugh, they don't really take it seriously. They're going to meddle in things that they don't really understand, probably because they don't really believe it. But this guy obviously turns out to be someone who is trying to raise Dracula from the dead, and he achieves his mission. I gotta say, this film is a bit bloodless. For, you know, like, I know that obviously that the horror films of that time are nothing compared to what we have these days in regard to the blood-soaked nature of things. But even the films in this series before this one seemed a lot more bloody, a lot more violent. You know, particularly if you look at like Scars of Dracula, that surprised me with a few scenes that it had in it that actually were quite bloody for its time. This one seems like it's been neutered somewhat. And I feel, again, that could be a budgetary thing. Like I say, this film does not look expensive. When you go back to Prince of Darkness and the 1958 Dracula, you look at those sets, you look at the effort that's gone into them, the period details and whatnot, you can tell some money has been spent on them. You know, they're mostly made in studios, but you can tell that money has gone into them. Whereas here, there's a lot of on-location shooting, but it feels like, you know, just places they could get on the cheap, and they're not particularly dressed all that well, and it's just, yeah, it all just feels a little bit shoddy, a little bit made for TV. And then when we do actually get to the horror element, it's not that horrific. The most blood we get in this film actually is when Dracula himself is killed. He gets the bloodiest death scene, whereas everyone else, such as it is, like I said, there's not that many killings in this. Don't get me wrong, I'm not that guy. I'm not that horror guy who's like, you know, it's all about the kills. But like I say, it just surprises me how bloodless this is, given that towards the end of Hammer's run, they did try to push things a bit more when it came to like the sex and violence and whatnot. And that's something in particular that Christopher Lee wasn't too enamored with. I think contractually he had to come back or something like this. I know that he was offered a lot more money for this one to return, and when he did return, he wasn't that happy, and particularly with certain lines of dialogue. He was, you know, he changed a lot of the dialogue himself. He refused to speak certain lines. I know the writer for this wanted to allude to Dracula himself being Satan, you know, whereas Lee was not on board with that. He was always very, you know, a bit like he was with Lord of the Rings. He was a stickler for the novel. He was a fan of the novel, and he was the one on set who was always championing being as faithful to the novel as possible. But obviously, once you bring these characters into present day, the original novel kind of gets thrown out the window because you're in uncharted territory as far as Bram Stoker is concerned. So, you know, I can understand the studio take on that from that point, but also I can sympathise and understand with Christopher Lee's position. Obviously, he respects the character. He wants it to go a particular way. But if I'm being perfectly honest, he doesn't get a right lot to do here. You know, given the amount of association, as I say, that Lee has with this character, the reputation that he gets because of this character, even though, as I say, he wasn't too enamored with it towards the end, he isn't really given a right lot to do. And it surprises me a great deal to find that his name is the first on the credits. He gets top billing. Peter Cushing is back. A very different approach, it must be said, to Christopher Lee. He was very much of the thinking that, hey, you know, I'm just happy to be here. You know, if these films make money, I will quite happily do them. I kind of prefer his mentality about it. You know, he didn't approach it like he was making Shakespeare or anything. He knew what it was, and he just. But his performance never suffered as a result. He never came and didn't give his best. I'm definitely more the Peter Cushing kind of guy than I was Christopher Lee. But as I say, given the amount of screen time, Peter Cushing in this gets much more screen time than Lee. He's very much the main focus a lot of the time. You know, he takes centre stage a lot more, and yet he doesn't get top billing, which it surprises me. But like I say, whether that was part of the deal struck with Lee to entice him back, I don't know. But yeah, I like Cushing here. I always like Cushing. For me, he is one of those kind of magnetic British actors that can take a lot of expositional kind of dialogue, which is something we'll get into in Satanic Rites of Dracula, and make it just watchable. You know, in that sense, he's like Donald Pleasance in Halloween, in which his character is mostly exposition, and yet you don't feel like you're watching someone who's just giving exposition because of the way they play it, the way they invest themselves into it. Peter Cushing is very much that kind of guy, and for me, he's the standout, as is usually the case. Christopher Neame, who plays Alucard, is very over the top, really over the top. I don't like the character. I don't discredit Neame, so to speak, because I think that everything he gives is asked of him. I think the problems lie in the script and the fact that they are asking him to go large. You know, I think they're not saying give me 100%, they're saying give me 150, and he does. He goes large in every scene. This is a guy who's essentially a religious fanatic. He just bats for the wrong team, and it's just, yeah. I feel like he really tries to chew up the scenery. He goes over the top on many occasions. I don't really feel like that's his fault so much as the direction and what is being asked of him. Stephanie Beacham, she's great here. She does what needs to be done. She plays the modern day Van Helsing's daughter, well, granddaughter, I should say. So this is keeping with the lineage of the Van Helsings, which is why we have Peter Cushing back. He's playing a different Van Helsing, but he just so happens to look identical to previous ones, which, you know, fine, whatever. It's not the first time they've done that in movies, and I'm sure it won't be the last, but if it's a way to get your main star back, albeit, or so be it. But yeah, so she plays his granddaughter, who kind of, she's the one who, out of all the teenagers, she's got more of a head on her shoulders. She doesn't really like to drink. She doesn't really want to be part of this seance. She's just there because her friends are there. She's not really the one who's going to go and have sex just because that's what all the kids are doing these days. And for that, she is the one who is obviously going to survive by the end of the film. This is very much a film that is all about not meddling in things that you don't understand, you know, not kind of looking into things that are of an evil nature and thinking that you can control them. You know, we see this in Alucard. He has certain expectations of what is going to happen when Dracula comes back, little realizing that he is no more than a puppet, that Dracula is not being brought back because of what he's doing, but he's doing what he's doing because Dracula has set it in motion. So yeah, you know, I like the theme of it. I do like some of the performances. I just think, as I say, the execution is a bit rough around the edges. Michael Coles plays this detective. This is where kind of one of the things about the film where it kind of loses it for me towards the end, because I like this guy. So they introduce this detective, and again, he will return in Satanic Rites, and he's the one who kind of gets Van Helsing involved, and the two of them kind of strike up a relationship, and they kind of back and to with information. But I feel like this guy is just dropped in the final act, unnecessarily so, and I feel like the film would have benefited from having him included in that final act, especially given what we get in Satanic Rites. And like I say, we'll get there when we get there, but I feel like, you know, this becomes very much Van Helsing's show at the detriment of this character. This guy he's essentially us, you know. Van Helsing is the one who is bringing us into his world, into the world of the occult and Dracula and his investigations, and we are represented through this character of Coles. You know, everything he's learning, we're learning along with him, that kind of thing. So it's just, yeah, it would have made more sense to have him be there at the end to witness this stuff, because he hears a lot of theory from Van Helsing. He hears a lot of, you know, like theorizing about what this is, and fairy tales, and you know, like traditions and things like that so far are just stories. And yeah, he's got a few little glimpses into some weird goings on, but nothing that can't be explained by just normal human psychopathic means, so to speak. So to have him be in the final conflict and actually see Dracula and see, say, his body melt away at the end when he's killed would give validity to Van Helsing, to his theories, and certainly help with certain things that get carried over into the following films. So for that for me is a bit of a misstep. Another huge misstep is the music. The music in this film is atrocious. It feels like something from a 70s blaxploitation film. It's in the wrong film, quite frankly. You know, like waka 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 waka. It just, yeah, that kind of jazz electric guitar thing that's just, I'm expecting a bunch of coppers with huge afros to start running around chasing each other over rooftops. It doesn't work for a Dracula film, regardless of whether they're trying to bring Dracula into the modern day or not. Yeah, it just doesn't work for me. I personally think they should have lost Dracula's usual attire as well, bringing him into the modern day, and still keeping him in the, you know, the black and red cloak and whatnot. That works for the 1800s. Doesn't quite work for modern day. You know, I feel like Dracula as a person would kind of want to blend in more with the times, and it just feels weird. It feels out of place. I get that he'd still be dressed like that coming out of the grave. That's essentially the clothes he was buried in, but I just feel like once he takes a look around at the modern world, he'd probably dress more appropriately. So all in all, this is an interesting film, I will say. You know, if you're a fan of Hammer, this is definitely one that you need to watch, I feel. It's let down in many ways. I don't think that it's like as terrible as some of the reviews I've heard. I know it does have a reputation as being a pretty terrible film. It's not quite that bad. It's certainly watchable. There's a lot to enjoy in it. I like the relationship between Van Helsing and his granddaughter, and between Van Helsing and, as I said, the detective. Even though the ball's kind of dropped with that towards the end, and I think the story, the setup, is a good one. I think it's an idea worth exploring, seeing Dracula being brought into the modern day. But I don't think it's handled particularly well, in the sense that we don't get to see him interacting much with that modern day and seeing how that clashes with the era from which he came. It's just like he's just there and he's just the same. And it's like, okay, the fact that this film takes place in modern day really has no bearing on the character of Dracula. So in that case, why do it? You know, why bother? Yeah. As I say, it is still watchable. So for me, it's really right down. It's right in the middle for me. I'm going to give this a 2.5 out of 5. It's not a film that I could call good per se, but I do think it's watchable. I do think you could have some fun with it. It's seriously lacking in budget and a few choices that were poorly made. But beyond that, yeah, Satanic Rites of Dracula coming up. It has a certain reputation. It is regarded widely by most people as perhaps the worst in the franchise. We'll see when we get there. But if you've seen Dracula AD 1972, please leave your thoughts about the film below. Let me know what you think of it. Have I been a little too harsh on it, or fair, or what? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching this video, and until next time, cracking.